Hello and welcome to Last Week On. My name is Adam Strawn and we are back after 2 long years. We're back covering The Last of Us Season 2. But before I get into that, I have someone to introduce. So he is the phenomenon who did The Last of Us Season 1 with me. He is the one and only Mr. Joey Dean. How you doing, Joey?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. And it's so nice to be back. 2 years flew by, but 2 years, I guess, well spent developing The Last of Us 2, and I'm really excited to discuss it.
Yeah, same, because there's a lot to go into. So, just to give you guys the outline of like what we're doing here. So, Joey and I are going to work our way through the first 4 episodes of The Last of Us. Now, at the time of recording, episode 5 has just aired, but we will come back and we will do the remaining 3 episodes, obviously, at a later time. But this is so interesting. It's going to be good to talk about this season because there's a lot in terms of difference from season 1. Thematically, it's different. The way it looks is different. The way it feels is different. And I guess that kind of speaks to the strength of the game as well, is that, the games are very different from each other. For all that they are the same kind of aesthetic, thematically, they're very different. And I feel like the show is definitely kind of leaning towards that, right?
For sure. I mean, I think the feeling is very different from the second game to the first. I think that when we all had our first run through playing it,
Yeah.
we felt that, especially because things happen in the beginning and that are just curveballs, and it just has a different vibe to it. And I think also just like TV shows, they evolve, they elevate, they change. And I think adapting a story this dense and complex into a cinematic format can absolutely offer opportunity for things to be adapted a little differently. So I expected it to be different. It definitely is quite different in certain regards, but nevertheless, I've been enjoying it.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's like it's at that interesting point now, and kind of season 1 was the same, where like the feel is very kind of up and down in terms of energy. So like, episode 2 has a lot more kind of energy and like grip on you than say maybe episode 1. That's me speaking personally. But it's interesting. It's similar in that I remember watching season 1 of The Last of Us, and kind of, it's very, very similar in many ways. Obviously, episode 3 did it's very much its own thing, which we love and we stan. But this kind of, yeah, it's interesting. It feels kind of very up and down. I don't mean this in good and bad. I just mean in terms of like the momentum. So like
Yeah.
after episode 2, episode 3 gives us a chance to breathe. Episode 4 kind of takes us a bit more on the journey.
Mhm.
Then obviously when we speak later on about episode 5, holy shit. So like,
Yeah.
things are definitely ebbing and flowing with this. And I'm just pleased that, the big moment, which you and I spoke about, and I was kind of saying, if they do that in episode 1, I'll commend them. But I love that they did it in episode 2 and the way that they focused on that. I'm pleased that they did it and they didn't drag it out and they kind of stuck to that because that was the big shock moment. There's a few little misgivings I have about it, but overall, I really like that.
Yeah. I think the first show, the first season rather, and the first game, they're so expositional in developing the world, in developing what the character dynamics are. And I also recognize the first game is a little shorter in theory in my memory than the second game, which is almost like the second game is almost like two games in one.
Yeah.
So when you look at the touch points of if I was sitting down and I was like, what am I going to extract from the second game to make the fans happy, to tell the story properly, I would be focusing on those really central touch points. And so it creates these smaller pockets of like, okay, there's a lot of big moments in the second game. And the first game just is a little more of that kind of slow burn
Yeah.
because it's so developmental. So it makes sense to me that the pacing is definitely different. And there's just so much in the second game. So
Mm.
there's a lot to to stick into the actual show. And I feel like they're monitoring and acknowledging those moments for sure. Like I'm watching and I'm like, okay, cool. The big game moments are present, and I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
So I guess
Same.
it's keeping the pacing pretty fast.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I kind of very much what you were saying, Joey, like it is it's a different game from the first game in terms of, as you said, there's a lot going on. It does feel like two games merged together, especially when you've got two protagonists and like telling two stories really that interweave with one another. But yeah, obviously like season 1, it is very much building that relationship between Joel and Ellie, and you got a lot of like, themes of like parenthood and looking after a child that isn't yours, and what's that mean in this type of world, and then how that can turn toxic and it can influence, your decisions going down that road of what's the greater good thing to do. And we see that in season 1, which spills into episode 1 one of this as well. But this, obviously, I like that, the second game is built a lot on revenge and what that can do to a person, right? Like, what does revenge mean in a world like this? And,
Yeah.
you know, I like that the show, it hasn't kind of thrown us into that straight away. It is kind of still, even though it happens, the big moment happens in episode two, we are still kind of building up to that more revenge-driven Ellie, which is when we do
Yeah.
talk about episode five, we can really lean into how that's like a switch, and we really
Yeah.
see that in her. But yeah, I'm excited to get into it and talk about it.
Yeah.
This is gonna be fun.
It's
So,
going to be real fun.
shall we start with episode one of season two?
Let's do it.
All right, so this is episode Future Days. Now, this is interesting because Joey and I obviously, talked about the show outside of this as well. And I remember after episode one, we were like, "What did you think?" We were little bit like, "This." I think comparatively to like season one, episode one is like so vastly different because like everything is happening. It's establishing the world. It's establishing the world going falling apart. There's like so much going on. Whereas this was such a more just like a gentle pace. It kind of didn't feel like a grandiose opening, but it didn't need to. It kind of just it was establishing a few things at the beginning, right? Like where we see it bleeds over, like Ellie confronting Joel again with that decision at the end, and then we get that kind of very light introduction to Abby and the other like WLF people, and like for people that don't know the games, are kind of like, oh, who are these new people? And
Mhm.
she's talking about she wants someone killed, and who is that? So it's an interesting opening to the episode. What did you think?
I remember walking away from it feeling like it didn't have the same, I don't know, preliminary premiere episode feeling. I remember thinking it felt almost like it was happening in the middle of the storyline a little bit.
Hmm.
And but I also recognize that that wasn't the case because if you actually watch season one and move into season two, like it's a vivid shift. So I think that there was a little bit of a, and I think the pacing is also part of it too, right? Like I think they were moving through episode one at a certain pace and setting up certain situations
Hmm.
to kind of move into this very fast-paced season. And so it was nice to see the backstory that in the game you see kind of interspersed in flashbacks to kind of have that laid out in the beginning from a fan perspective. I was like, oh, I really loved the flashback, kind of like you're slowly unveiling this story of Joel and Ellie and what happens behind the scenes. And it creates this level of suspense, narrative suspense in terms of the friction and the conflict between them. And whereas this episode starts out, or the season starts out with this episode that just kind of lays it all out and is like, this is where they're at.
Hmm.
Um, I think that part of what felt probably correct, but also a bit of a shift was some of the characterizations, like
Hmm.
Joel, for instance, being so, for lack of a better word, timid compared to his sensibilities in the first season. He's such a badass in the first season. He's so tough. He's so hard. He's so scaled over. And then you enter Joel in season two, and he's this like introspective, really thoughtful, therapy seeking, almost super sad human. Um, and that sadness is more raw than it is covered up in with the toughness of him in the first season. So there's a little bit of a shift there, and I think
Hmm.
that shift creates a bit of a kind of a jarring sense of like, oh, this feels very different. Not even just in like where we're at and what we're doing, but
Hmm.
in that like the characters themselves feel like they're just in a different place, and it feels really abrupt.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely like, it is trying to establish that time has moved on, right? So like we are looking at 5 years later. For all that, they do try and dress up Bella Ramsey as best they can. I don't know if she looks like 5 years later, Bella Ramsey, but
Yeah.
the hairstyle is there, like given the older clothing, tied up in the bun at the dance later on. But I will say that, you can feel the difference in the characters, absolutely. And that is in Joel, in Ellie. And like, with Joel, to talk about Joel briefly in this episode, because this is the most of Joel I guess we get. I mean, the introduction with Catherine O'Hara, like Queen. Like, can we just stand for a second? But that's a new character, obviously not in the game. But I do like the way that she is used in this. So like, we play as these characters so that, we are kind of watching things unfold, we're making decisions for them. So this is a nice moment to get inside of their psyche and to really kind of, hear what they think. And what I like about this is that she isn't like she's not just going along with what Joel's telling her and saying like, oh yeah, let's explore that. She's calling him out on his bullshit. So like Joel for the longest time, obviously in the last kind of at the end of the last game, last show going into this, he's kind of been trying to establish the narrative of what happened, or I did this because. Catherine O'Hara's like, no, I'm sorry. Her name's Gail, obviously in the show, but I'm going to keep calling her Catherine O'Hara because
Yeah,
she's a queen.
same.
Um, but she's like, no, like, I want you to tell me the truth. And and she does that a lot. And truth is such an interesting thing with her because later on, when she talks to Ellie, she's like, I know you're lying to me, but I'm going to go along with this little narrative because eventually I'll see your truth. And I think she's really good at this. Like in these therapy sessions with Joel, she knows that all of this that you're doing right now, bullshit. I don't care about that. And remember what you did with my husband, but I want to see the truth of it. And that's why later on, like when Joel gets really emotional and is like breaking down when he talks to her, she's like, there it is. So I,
Yeah.
I do like that, there is a difference in the characters, but I like that we've got this Catherine O'Hara character. I think it makes sense kind of thematically within the show to explore how the characters are feeling and why
Mhm.
they're doing what they're doing. So it is bringing Joel to question there because hell, if anything, the opening of the show of this season of this episode reminds us that Joel ain't a great guy. Like what he did was pretty despicable, and we can go either way on that. But I like that we've got this character that does that, and obviously later on, she doesn't just disappear after this. She does the same with Ellie later on as well. So I do like the Catherine O'Hara character as an addition to this series.
Yeah, there's a nice exploration that, as we've seen in this season so far, but also how, as we've witnessed in the game, and as we'll see through the next few seasons of the show, there is this kind of, I don't know, question that the audience is offered about, and the characters themselves, about what
Mm.
is a villain and what is a hero, and
Yes.
how does subjective trauma justify villainous behavior. And I think Catherine O'Hara as being Gail, as being a character who kind of, as she's a therapist, and just to like clarify for those who aren't keen on the game, she is not in the game. Gail doesn't exist in the game, and so this is an introduction into the show for probably to cast someone really fun, but also to offer like a little bit more of the world building of what might happen in a society,
Hmm.
in a system that, if we are functioning and if we are trying to create a semblance of society in a post-apocalyptic world, like obviously a therapist might be necessary, but it
Yeah.
allows us some curtain being pulled back of seeing into the characters a little bit more deeply. And another thing that we explore a lot, and you will be more explored especially in the next season, is this idea of mirroring and how characters mirror each other. And so I find Gail and Catherine O'Hara's character to be this a bit of a mirror and like a microcosm of the story at large, in that we're seeing her harbor this hatred for Joel despite her recognizing the necessity of the action. And I think that's a really fun iterative story of what actions are necessary in this post-apocalyptic world, and how despite the necessity of them, they still create trauma and hatred, and they create situations with, I don't know, justifiable villainous or heroic behaviors. And I think it's
Mm.
really interesting to kind of plant that seed right now as we're taking this turning point, because obviously this is setting up season two, but we know as players of the game, like this is really setting up seasons two and seasons three, and
Hmm.
possibly, depending on how they take the show, season four. And so this is just like a seed that's being planted in how the story is unfolding moving forward. And I think that is really interesting.
And that seed continues to grow, and that's the main thing. Like I love where we go with that, and like obviously, Joe and I will dance around too many spoilers for the rest of the game. We'll kind of trying to stick as much as we can to what we've
I'm
seen so far
speaking
in the
so
show.
vague as I
I
can. I'm
know.
so sorry, Adam.
No, 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 it's good. In my mind, I'm like tick, 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 because I played the game. But obviously,
Yep.
I understand the language that you're talking. But yeah, but obviously for others that don't, this will be paid off, and then it'll be paid off in a really lovely way. But I guess Joel will be a good point to talk about actually, because this and obviously episode two, yikes. Well, I guess we kind of get, in both of those episodes, like the best of Joel and the most of Joel. Obviously, it very much hints towards later on that we are going to get an epic flashback scene that the gamers will know exactly what I'm talking about, which is like an iconic moment in the second game.
So
So we
excited.
are, we absolutely, and like I like the way, just as a little sidebar, the game hints towards that because in every episode so far we've seen a little dinosaur in some way, And I like that it's hinting towards that, whether that be a print on a t-shirt, a dinosaur in the background. When
And
in
they did that
episode
with the giraffe in the first season,
they
didn't
did
they?
indeed.
Yeah.
They did indeed. Yes, the
Yeah.
little giraffe toy. So, and then we got that payoff at the end of, episode 9 of season 1 when they see the giraffes, and that's an iconic moment from the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, and I like as well, I'll come back to Joel in a second. Speaking of giraffes, I like the way at the start of this episode when you see Abby. And by the way, for those that don't know, like, this is an interesting introduction to Abby because it gives a lot more away about her intentions. Whereas in the game, you get introduced to this character who you have no idea about what she wants, what she's doing, and even leading up to the events of episode 2, there's so much more of a what the fuck is going on in the game, whereas it's kind of explicitly more laid out here. And I think even the language that she says, when she talks about like, oh, like I'm gonna kill him, I'm gonna get my vengeance for what he did, and it's like, so, but I do like that in that opening when she's looking at the graves of the other WLF moment, well, the Fireflies, in the distance, she looks at giraffes. And I think that's such an interesting moment compared to like what that meant, the innocence of that moment for what that meant for
Mm.
Joel and Ellie, like in season 1. And that was such a beautiful bonding moment for them both. And then that almost being in the distance now for me is almost symbolic of that ain't happening anymore. We are so
Yeah.
far away from that. Joel and Ellie in episode 1 are at almost at like polar opposites now, like where there's so much distance between them. Whereas you think
Yeah.
about that moment, they were so connected. And
I love
although that
that.
happens with Abby, I love that. It's her kind of looking at the past and saying, we're not there anymore. We're so beyond that. And I really
Yeah.
like that thematically. I thought that was a really strong point. But
I,
to
I
talk,
think it's
yeah,
oh, I just want to comment on that really quick, just to plant the seed of mirroring too, because like when Joel and Ellie are witnessing the giraffes, it's so innocent, like you
yeah,
said, and then switch the perspective to Abby. It is all about perspective. That
yes.
image is now going to be seared in her mind as something as the complete antithesis of innocent.
Hmm.
So it's really interesting how perception and perspective and the vantage point really plays a role in how something is perceived.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to say that because I think that'll be really important, kind of through line moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to reiterate this point, keep an eye out for those dinosaurs in every episode because they're hidden, but you'll see them. And when we lead up to that moment, this flashback moment, which is beautiful, it'll all make sense. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, I guess we can talk about Joel a little bit in this episode, Joey, because Joel's interesting in this. So we have talked a little bit about obviously, his therapist session with Catherine O'Hara, what that means, and going forward, what that will mean, not just with Joel, but obviously, I guess the purpose of that character of Gail as well in later episodes. But it's interesting because, as I said and hinted towards, we had this togetherness, we had this closeness, and he'll always see himself as this father figure to Ellie, and that's very, very clear. And that obviously informed his decisions of what he did with that mass murder at the end of season 1. But this is so different. There's a lot of distance between them. I think Ellie is obviously 5 years on. She's understanding the situation a lot more. She knows that he is not telling her the full story. And this is interesting where even like we're going to get as well in the hints towards, they do talk about when after the dance, which we'll get to that shortly, like there's a moment where they look at each other when he's on his kind of outside of his house. And there's a conversation that clearly happened there that we haven't seen yet. And there's a lot of hints towards what that meant. In the game, it's a very iconic scene on the porch outside. That's a very iconic moment for them both because there's a lot revealed there. We haven't seen that yet. But going forward, just with Joel so far, as we said, he's a lot more emotional. He isn't as much as that badass character from season 1. He feels a lot more broken down. In many ways, very xenophobic. Like he talks, about Maria saying, "Oh no, we don't want anyone else coming in here. We want to keep these walls up. We want to keep people out." Which is so interesting for Joel because right now he is trying to keep people out. He's like, he's not opening himself up with Catherine O'Hara. He doesn't want to tell Ellie the full truth. He wants people to believe the narrative that he's spun. And yet he still can't help himself that he is that father figure, for Ellie when he goes to see her later on and says, "Oh, I think you should go to the dance tonight, to the ball. It'll be really good." And the distance between them is so interesting, the way they play it, where the eye contact, he's forever looking at her and she's forever looking away from him. And she knows. And even later on at the dance, when there's the homophobic comment meant by the guy, and Joel straight away pushes the guy down, and it's almost like Joel is still trying to control the situations, right? He is making decisions on behalf of Ellie. Whereas Ellie's at that point where she's like, "You made this big decision. I don't know the full aspect about what it is that you made. You did something. You're not telling me the full story. I don't like that." And then that's the big distance between them. And that's still the question, I guess, lingering in Ellie's mind. And Joel can't help himself. He's forever doing that. And that's kind of the position that he's laid himself in. So I think that's really interesting that we get that from Joel in this episode. What do you think of Joel in general with this episode, Joey?
I think he's a really great exploration of trauma and PTSD. I think he is someone who is virtually locked in time in the two most traumatic moments of his life. And they
Mm,
both are, again, mirrors of the same situation. One being Sarah's death, which we see in the first episode of the show and season one. And then how that is kind of mirrored at the end of season one with Ellie and him rescuing Ellie. And so I think he's kind of frozen in these two moments in time. And for him, there's this urge, this insatiable urge to protect. And he can't not protect because what's on the other side of protection is, or as without protection is death.
mhm.
And he already lost Sarah. And so he, even though he's clinging on tooth and nail, he isn't letting go. And I don't think he can. I don't think he can exist in a world in which he lets go of that. I don't think that he would function. And so he's clinging on to Ellie in every way and now perceiving threats that aren't always threats, even like socially, and how she's just operating as a young adult, discovering herself, her identity, her sexuality. Like there's these individualistic pieces of self-exploration that he's inhibiting because he is seeing every single thing as a potential threat against the protection of Ellie because he's still living in those traumatic moments. And I think he's just frozen there a little bit.
Yeah, and I think PTSD is the perfect description of that, Joey, what you said there. I think it is because, as you said, like that was one of the most traumatic moments of his life, losing his daughter in his own arms, right? I mean, it's going to be for anyone. That's completely understandable. And that makes sense as to why he is clinging on to Ellie so much because that is the last chance he'll ever have at a daughter, like it really is. So, like, he feels that like, oh my god, she is my daughter, like I have to protect her, and he does absolutely feel that, and we kind of see that over and over again like within this episode. So I think what you said there is perfectly aligned with what we get with Joel here. I was going to say with Joey there, with Joel here. And as we said, like that kind of leads more into why he is so emotionally driven. Like why it always seems like whenever he's talking, he's almost at the point often of like he could start crying at any point, and like he's there. So like anything to kind of keep people away from that, to keep himself from getting there, he's doing that. So he is all the time putting up these emotional barriers, talking about keeping literal barriers up around Jackson. We ain't letting anyone else in because there is always that worry at the back of his mind of what if people find out about what I did? And in his mind, he did the right thing. He protected his daughter figure. But the repercussions of that, everyone else ain't going to see it like that. And the person who isn't going to see it like that is Ellie, because you took that choice away from her. She wanted to go through and do it, and you'd stop that from happening. And I guess this is a good kind of segue to lean in to talk about Ellie in this episode, because, and I guess we'll link in as well, like Dina and Isaac to a degree as well. Not Isaac, what am I on about? Jesse. We'll lean in Jesse as well in there as well. But yeah, I really like this tension between them. Obviously, we get this in the game as well, of course we do, but it feels earned, and we understand it because, as we say, Joey, like when we look at Ellie in season one, she's very much like a child figure. She's still learning the world. She's still learning like relationships between what it means to have a father figure, what it is to have a relationship with an adult, right? Like this is all learning for her. And like at the end of season one, I think we really see a different Ellie from the start of season one when she's looking Joel in the eyes. It's like, you tell me the goddamn truth. Is this what happened? And she even knows in her mind, like when he says yes, like the way she looks down and just says, okay, I think she knows. And that is like a seed that you said earlier on that is starting to grow arms and legs and become this ugly thing between them where she still knows, you're not telling me the whole truth. And in doing that, you took a choice away from me. Like 5 years have passed now, she's an adult. She needs to be making her own decisions, right? So, like, when she pursues the relationship, she has these feelings for Dina, which is new and fantastic. And I love that relationship. And we'll obviously talk about that a little bit more. But again, it's always like whenever she's like taking two steps forward in making her own decisions, Joel is almost there in the background, ready to say, no, like this is what needs to happen. And that's what happens at the ball. Like she has this beautiful moment. She made the decision to, although Joel said she should go, she still went. It was for Dina, for her own intention. She didn't go there for Joel. She went there to see Dina, right? And like they have that beautiful moment together. And then when that homophobic guy comes along and says that shit about them, and Joel's the one that steps in and pushes him down. And like in any other context, you might think, oh, Joel did a really nice thing for Ellie there. But Ellie is pissed because, again, that's Joel taking a decision away from her. She is old enough to handle that situation, and yet he still can't help himself. He's stepping in and saying, no, no, I'm protecting my daughter. And that's getting her back up because she's like, God damn it, I can do this myself. I don't need you stepping in at every moment. I'm a different person now. And I think that's a really interesting kind of development for Ellie because that leans into later on what the decisions look like that she makes, obviously from episode 2 onwards, you know?
Yeah. And I think decision's a really interesting topic and a strong word because what Joel decides for her at the end of season one
Mm,
is what defines everything, their relationship and their actions in season two onward. And so I think that Ellie feels as though Joel took away from her ultimate decision. And of course, from a realistic perspective, Ellie doesn't know what's at the other side of that decision because
right.
when she is taken by the fireflies, she's knocked out and she doesn't yet understand that if she was to go through with being the cure that she would die. And so there isn't that she doesn't get to make that decision for herself.
Mm,
Joel makes it for her, and I think that Ellie is harboring that, and I think that's what a lot of this comes down to is
hmm.
her kind of planting her foot, her putting her foot down and saying, "I'm making decisions for myself. I can handle myself,
Yes.
and I can take care of myself." And also, we've seen that version of Ellie since the beginning of season one. She's not someone that wants to be told what to do, when to do it. She's always going to make her own decisions, even before she met Joel. And so, even Gail says, I don't know if it's in episode two or this episode, but I think it's episode two. She basically says that Ellie and Joel are a lot more similar
Hmm.
in nature
Yeah.
than they are nurture. And I
Hmm.
think that Ellie's also responding the same way that Joel would, in that
Hmm.
like I am my own individual. I don't tell me what to do.
Yes.
Because that's basically what he's he's having that relationship with everybody, including Gail. Don't tell
Right.
me what to do.
No, you're so right. And like obviously that this is the start of it because later on, like, when they have the council meeting about what do they do about the accidents that happened in episode 2, and Ellie's like, no, fuck this, I'm going. I don't care what anyone says in this room, I'm out of here. So it's interesting like that decision making and decision is a really, as you said, a really kind of big thematic exploration of this whole season, right? The decisions that we make and the impact. And obviously that was very much started at the end of episode 1. That was like almost like a bomb that was dropped. Like when you make a decision, this is kind of what happens. And that's interesting that the learning that we take from, paternal figures or whatever it may be, that's almost passed on to Ellie in an interesting way from Joel unintentionally, of like
Mm-hmm.
learning the impact of the decisions that you make. And you learn that almost later on because in this world that we're in, that can be so unforgiving. Time moves so differently. The time that you have to make the decision is minute often. And
Yeah.
it's kind of you're working on impulse and you're working on emotion. And we see that Joel was very much emotionally driven when he made that decision at the end of season 1. And then when episode 2 happens, Ellie is very emotionally driven and it leans into revenge. And I think that's so interesting for her.
Yeah.
But I like as well what's balanced with Ellie is her relationship with Dina. And I love this relationship. I mean, I love it in the games anyway. Like, I love Dina. Like, Dina's such a great character. And the actress that they've got playing Dina here, I mean, she has breathed new life into that character in a way that I didn't think anyone would. Like I think she is brilliant. Sidebar, she's going to be in the new Superman movie playing Hawkgirl, which if anyone doesn't know, is like my
He's
favorite character ever. So I'm super excited for that.
amazing.
She was in the latest Alien movie as well, if anyone remembers that. But I'm just so happy that she nails this character because it's such a character that could just be such a extension of Ellie. But she feels so much that she stands on her own 2 feet. She could just be the love interest, and that could work in some version of this. But Dina is so charismatic in the game, and I love that this is translated with her. So like even at the dance, like when she sees her and like she's having a bit to drink, and like she's a bit more lucid, and like I just love that in all of this crazy world where Ellie's got so much on her shoulders, thinking about this, breaking down relationship with her father figure and is trying to kind of establish where she is in Jackson and how she fits in. She's got this one constant, and I just love the way the relationship builds. And I mean, in the game as well, it's just expertly done with the flirting and like the conversations between each other. But you and I as gamers know this, Joey. Like this moment at the dance is pivotal for like kickstarting everything. And the way it was shot, like behind Ellie with her hair up in a bun and like the same shirt on and like the lights above her. And then when they come together and just start like spinning like slowly with each other and then the kiss, it's like I just love it. It's wonderful. And I love
Yeah.
the character of Dina with this.
I think that a lot of the contention I witness online about the show is centered around this idea that it's not an exact replica of the game. And
Hmm.
I personally believe making any adaptation an exact replica could arguably become a disservice because it becomes a
Hmm.
hyper controlled artistic experience as opposed to something that has its own life and organic sense of evolution.
Yeah.
But what I really like about how they have explored The Last of Us, we're seeing more of it in season two, but I think this scene is a good example of it, is it's planting its roots in the ground of these very iconic visuals, these very
Hmm.
iconic dreamlike sequences that we still think about after the game. This
Yeah.
is one of those sequences. Like if
Yeah.
I were to have certain visions seared in my brain, flashbacks of the game, I think season two so far has explored so many of them, but
Hmm.
this is one of them. It is the when they walk into the dance, everything shot for shot is almost identical. I thought it was gorgeous. I thought it was stunning, and I also really enjoy Dina as a character in contrast to Ellie because as an actress, as opposed to the character in the game, I feel like the casting of Dina in the show it has a bit more, based on my opinion and perception, a bit more femininity to her.
Hmm.
I think she's a bit more traditionally girly
Hmm.
than what I would perceive Dina to be in the game when I played. And I think that's important because it creates more of this masculine sensibility to Ellie, which we're
Mm.
learning. We're learning that Ellie is a more masculine figure in season two. We learned it more in the second game. And, those who don't play the game obviously we're learning that for the first time. But to go back to the mirroring and something you said about like this like parental figure, this like father figure inheritance, one of the things we're already seeing throughout the first four episodes that we're discussing today is that there is a sensibility of Ellie that is mirroring some of Joel and how she's becoming a little bit more like Joel. And so there is this kind of like transformation into this masculine figurehead. And I think having Dina as like a more hyper feminine counterpart is a nice way to establish that dynamic and create more of I don't know, a believability. And as we see as like the show plays this season, I feel like you kind of see that when Ellie and Dina are together, I feel that contrast.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, like definitely in her presentation as well, because like the way that we see Dina in the game, like even little things like her hair's tied up, like whereas like this is gorgeous locks that we've got with like with Dina flowing all the time, and the actress is gorgeous. Um, but as well, I just love that sense of like she is like the light in so many dark scenes, like where, I mean, episode two, that's very different because her light is taken away from her, which we'll talk about in that episode. But I love that, she's so like whimsical and fun all the time. And like, even though it's trying to establish that, in this kind of world, which can be very dreary and very miserable, and in many ways, the second game can feel like that. But I don't say that as a negative. I just say that tonality, like it can feel like that, can feel very kind of, dragged down and very kind of rough around the edges. But Dina is the constant through that for us as viewers, but also like, as players for Ellie as well. But I just love the little things, like when they go out together on their patrol and she makes like the barbecue joke and like little things, because Ellie, as we've seen, latches on to puns like that. And, we see her later on in her diary when she writes down barbecue and like puts hearts around and says like, don't fuck it up. And it's lovely to see like that connection. You can see why this character would be somebody that Ellie would be attached to because
Yeah.
she's like, she is like she sees Ellie for who she is and she loves that, whereas the difference with that and Joel is that she almost feels like Joel's almost trying to tell her like this is the way that things should go. I'm making the decisions here. Can you see my point of view? Whereas Dina's just like seeing the person who she is, and you can see why Ellie would gravitate towards that so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love this. Like, I love that connection between them. And as you said, it is different from the game in many ways. But the way that they've played it here is just with such warmth, such grace. I get excited when I see her in scenes because she just delivers, and I just love that connection between them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just played beautifully. And again, as you said, those iconic moments from the game that are seared into our brains, like that is absolutely one of them. Like at the community ball, it just makes sense. Like it's beautiful. But I will say, I'll talk a little bit about thematically of this episode. I like the little things that it does start to establish, which then bleed over in the other episodes. And I think one of the big things is this sense of music and what that means for the characters. So obviously, we know from the game and we know from kind of this episode as well that they come back to the guitar all the time. And that's a big thing. Joel taught Ellie how to play. And we see that guitar being passed to her from Joel. There's a mission even in the game when you have to go and replace the guitar strings, which is hinted at in this first episode. But I love this kind of theme of music. And like, music is such a through line in the show. Think back to season one, we talked about it quite often. Like, they're very particular in the songs that they choose and lyrically what that means. But like even here, like when we see like flashes in Ellie's bedroom, we see vinyls, we see posters, we see cassettes, and they're all reflective of like Ellie's mood. And like Dina and Ellie flirting, like the music that's selected there, there's always something behind that. And I think that's so interesting when we talk about like, the passing on of something. Like that is something positive which Joel passed on to Ellie. And we live in a world now where music and everything has stopped. We don't have artists bringing out new music anymore. All we can do is look to the past and enjoy things from the past with music because we don't have a world where that happens anymore. Which is why when we get to episode 4, we'll talk about it, is that's why it's so meaningful when Dina sits and listens to live music played by Ellie. Like that's such a gorgeous moment. But I just think that's so interesting thematically that we get this where, we see little things of like, Ellie has astronaut like posters up, which of course we know what that means. But as well, like just this theme of music, I think is so wonderfully explored in the show. And even in this episode, when we see that guitar is such a symbol between Joel and Ellie.
Yeah. I think music is such a like someone could probably write a dissertation, someone who knew
Yeah.
me, on the music inside The Last of Us. But what I would say is the most intriguing point of it and the evolution of music is in the first game, music is more of a divisive, especially in the show, it's more of a divisive agent that is external. And so, if we flash back to the kind of like coding system that they used when
Yes.
they were like, if it's 80s, it's danger or something.
Hmm.
So there's more of like this external relationship with music. It's an external divisive agent.
Hmm.
And what I find so interesting, I'm going to harp on this idea of mirroring and the idea of reiterative stories and how stories are kind of passed on through maybe this idea of parentage or through like nurture. And how now in the second game, we're seeing music being interpreted through the character herself, through the main
Hmm.
character. And so it is this chewing up and spitting out of the song. It's not the song as played externally, as used as an external divisive agent, but it's something that's now interpreted. It is now
Hmm.
through perception. And so going back to even the beginning with like that a vision of Abby looking at the giraffes and how the perception is so different. We're now
Mm.
seeing perception explored so vividly. And we'll talk about this more in the later episode where she performs for the first time, but
Hmm.
there's a specific quality of mirroring from the first energies and perceptions to now. And I love even like the dinosaur and kind of space imagery. And I think we spoke about this in the first season, but like how one is synonymous with like the future and exploration, space travel, one is synonymous with the past. And then we have these
Yes.
characters who are just fixed in place. And
Yeah.
so music too is this thing that's fixed in place. It's not evolving, it's not growing. And so it's simply being reinterpreted. It's simply being just like seen through all these different
Mm.
visions and lenses as opposed to, something of creation. I don't know. There's maybe this is maybe a little wordy and in my
No, I
brain
love
I
it.
need to like think through it less abstractly, but um I guess my core point is Ellie is interpreting the music for the first time. The guitar is she's the instrument for that communication. And
Mm.
I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, no, that's brilliantly put. I can't even add to that, Joe. You've nailed that. And as we say, like as the episodes go on, that really does grow to the point of when we get to episode 4, that's like a peak point of exploration with that, which we'll talk about a lot for
Yeah.
definitely a lot of reasons. But just to talk about briefly before we move on to episode 2, I do love the introduction of the Stalker. I think that is so well done. And like it's interesting as well because with obviously the infected, we get the roots that are growing in the pipes of Jackson, which is, we talked about this is new for the
Yeah.
show that is different from the game, where it's like this interconnected system where they are linked in somewhere where if something happens with the roots over here, the infected over here like are alerted. So I think this is so interesting that the roots are growing through the pipes, and we see that at the end, like when the sparkler kind of lands and like the roots kind of like withdraw from that, like that danger of that fire. But I did love the stalker sequence, like the way it plays out when like you see the stalker from behind and like it's kind of following Ellie, and like for people that obviously aren't aware of that creature, you're like, oh, what is this? It's acting so different. It's not so mindless. It is a lot more, it's a lot smarter. It's picking its hiding places. The noises that it makes are so interesting. It's almost like a childlike whimsical laugh in some ways, which doesn't make sense. It's like counterintuitive to what this creature looks like. But I love seeing this stalker. And obviously, as we get on to later episodes, especially episode 5, like just how deadly they can be. But I loved all of this. Like it's still that lingering danger, which for all that, Jackson has moved forward. I know we're outside of Jackson at this point. It's Ellie and Dina when they see that. But for all that they are moving forward and kind of rebuilding society, the way that this is shot, it is almost like, remember, this is still following you from behind the whole time. And I just thought it was beautifully played.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just my misperception, but I felt like when I played the games, I just kind of thought the stalkers were just like running into walls. Like I felt like there wasn't a lot of intellect behind their decision making and their like stalkerish behavior. Like they were
Mm.
predator seeking prey. I
Yes.
definitely wasn't picking that up playing the games. I don't know. I think I was just so focused on killing them. Um, but whether it was intended to be intellectual or a higher intelligent version in the game or not, I still like the exploration of the evolution of the infection
Hmm.
and how this kind of colony of not bacterium. What are mushrooms? What are they?
Hmm.
What
Oh,
family are they?
yeah.
Fungi.
Yes, fungus.
Fungi.
Yes, fungi.
This community of fungi are evolving, and we see the tendrils coming out of the pipe. We learn it takes us somewhere throughout the season, which I think it's really nice that they focused on the intellectual properties of the stalker for that reason to kind of plant the seed of evolution, which
Hmm.
kind of brought us back full circle
Hey.
in episode 5, which I'm so happy about. And but we're seeing this seed planted of like the intellect and the growth and the evolution of the infected. And I also think that there is something to be said about like the deeper metaphor of like the infection and how it's
Hmm.
evolving and how it's simmering and how maybe it exists in the deepest bottom basement and how also like the
Mm.
characters themselves are kind of experiencing that same like festering and
Yeah.
evolution of trauma. I think it's I don't know if that's intended, if that's just me being long-winded, but
No,
I
no.
I think there could be a conversation there about that and the evolution of the trauma, the evolution of the infection. But
Mm.
I think it's really fun to see that, and I think the stalkers are also just fun. They're just
Yeah.
fun. They're a fun thing to play with in the game and to watch.
No, 100%, because it's so different from what we've seen before from the infected. So it is so nice to see that. And as you say, it is giving a little bit of hint as well, like, for episode 2, like, that's the really big, like, infected episode. So it is kind of hinting towards, remember these little, like, the vines, the tentacles that are growing in the pipes, that will come back later on. And oh boy, does it not.
Yeah.
But yeah, Joey, just to kind of wrap up episode 1, what rating would you give it out of 10?
So I think the show is so beautiful and brilliant. I love everything about it. So I can't be like I didn't like it, but I would say it's on the lower end of what I've perceived so far from the show, top to bottom. I'd
Hmm.
probably safely give it a 7.
Hmm. Yeah.
Safely give it a 7 out
I
of
had
10.
some 7.5. That was mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It did some great stuff setting up. As I say, it wasn't as like grandiose as like say season 1, episode 1, but it's good. It's good. But I
Yeah.
think there's better episodes to come, which, speaking of which, let's move on to the big episode, arguably could be described as the biggest episode of the season, potentially, which I would disagree with. I think bigger things are coming. But episode 2, Through the Valley.